on this computer? Okay, so in many the way the American presidency works, the American government works, is that you have three branches of government. You have the judicial, okay, and that really has absolutely nothing to do with America and Israel. It's very rare that that ever has anything to do with anything. We don't pay attention. You can't lobby members. I mean, you shouldn't be able to lobby judges. So that really rather has nothing to do with anything to us. Then you have the legislative branch of the government. That's Congress and the Senate. They make laws. And then you have the executive. You have the administrative part of that's the president. Now, all three branches are supposedly equal. That's how the Constitution lays it out. They're all equal, and each of them has a check and balance from somebody else. Right? There's so congressional law is checked by the president because the president has to sign all laws into power, and then both of them are checked by the Supreme Court. That you could sue if you're affected by a law that you don't like. So you could sue. So you have all checks and balances, and that's how it works. Now, I'm absolutely fascinated with the American presidency. I love everything to do with the American presidency, from who's serving drinks at the White House to the powers of the Constitution. And one thing that presidential scholars have noticed is that presidential power has gotten much stronger than the framers of the Constitution wanted. Okay, now how did that happen? Because presidents are supposed to administrate. Okay, now what that means is that Congress passes a law and then gives it to the president, says to the president, you have to make sure this law is carried out. So for instance, if Congress passes a law on taxes, so the IRS is the branch of the American government that enforces taxes, the Internal Revenue Service. But the IRS works for the president, okay? Works for a cabinet minister who works for the president. So in fact, the president is the one that gives the orders. Now, sometimes you can't, a certain, let's say, government office can't handle all its work. So then it has to be, it can only do some of its work, right? It can't do all of its work, can't accomplish everything that Congress set out for it. Now, that's a shame and that shouldn't happen, but a lot of times Congress, at the same time that it tells, let's say, the State Department or the Federal Reserve to do a ton of stuff, but then at the same time doesn't give it enough money to hire enough people to do it. So in which case things have to be cut out. So the president, it's not literally the president, but it's the president's office. The White House is the one that then says, okay, this is what you should focus on. This is what we don't have time or resources to focus on. But it also allows the president to say that things that he doesn't want to happen, to be able to say, don't pay attention to that so much. So for instance, a president that doesn't want to have harsh immigration policies can simply tell the Department of Homeland Security, don't catch anybody on the Arizona border. We're going to be focused on the Texas border today, or we're going to be focusing ourselves on Montana mostly because we want to make sure that no Canadians come in through Montana. So we're going to shift all our resources from the southern border up in Mexico up into Montana, in which case Mexico becomes an open door. Right, and everybody goes through. So that's the power of the president. Although that's not what the Constitution, like the framers' Constitution wanted, that's actually what happens. Okay. Now, one of these places is the State Department that's under the president. The president's in charge by the Constitution of foreign policy. The State Department is the one that carries out the president's wishes on foreign policy. Okay, the State Department is the one that sends out diplomats to talk to everybody. Okay, and then all the embassies are staffed by State Department people. Okay, so that's how the State Department is the one that carries out the president's foreign policy directives. Congress cannot pass foreign policy laws. So you say the president has a complete dictatorship over foreign policy. Not true, because anything he wants to do foreign policy that costs money, Congress has to pass. The president can't spend money unless Congress has okayed it. But again, the president can always cheat and shift money from one place to another. So while there are checks and balances, there's also ways around everything. Okay, so that's how it works. The State Department is supposed to reflect the president's wishes, right? So the Secretary of State is chosen by the president. The check on that is that it has to be approved by the Senate, but it's very rare for the Senate to say that a president chooses a secretary and he says no. Okay, so you do have the secretary following the president's orders, okay, and how he wants things. Usually he'll choose somebody that thinks like him, so he doesn't really have that problem. Got it? Everybody following so far? Riveting stuff. Okay, so now the Secretary of the State Department has people that are hired with each administration. Okay, so for instance, the secretary, and then the people under the secretary also are people hired by the president or the secretary and the president's wishes. So those people will always support the president's initiatives. But you have career State Department people who have been there for 30, 40 years that are going to be there for another 20 years until they drop or retire. And those people can also carry out things against the wishes of the secretary simply because they've been there forever and they know how things work. And by the time the secretary figures all that stuff out, he's out of a job already. He's gone on to his next job. Okay. So that's how State Department works. Now, the State Department since the 1940s has been notoriously anti-Israel. A lot of people would use the term anti-Semitic. That's debatable and not really important for now. But the State Department has been notoriously anti-Israel for a very simple reason. The State Department, let's say they're not anti-Semitic. I'm not so sure, but let's say they're not anti-Semitic, and that's not the reason. For the State Department, it makes more sense. There are more Arabs than Jews, and there's more oil than Jewish money. So for America's interest, according to the State Department bureaucracy, it makes more sense to make nice to the Arabs than it does to the Jews. This was Secretary of State Marshall, his argument to President Truman when President Truman wanted to recognize Israel in 1948. Secretary of State Marshall said, "You're crazy. You're choosing 30 million Arabs to set them aside for 1.5 million Jews. The Arabs have the oil. The Jews have just some money in America. This is a really bad decision that you're making. And if you recognize Israel, I will not vote for you in the next election." Okay, that's a big thing. George Marshall was a very popular general and very popular in America, and Truman would need him to win the next election. Funny thing was that Truman didn't run for the next election, so it didn't really matter in the end. But that was something that Truman really was concerned about, that his Secretary of State was going against him, and that set forth in motion sort of what's always been known is that the State Department is not in favor of Israel and is always pro-Arab. And I have people from the State Department in my house all the time, people that are career State Department people, and it is so true. These people like sit at my table resentful. They hate being there. They're in the settlements. They have no idea why they're there. They can't stand it. They think that I'm a criminal, that Israel's horrible. They'll say it straight to my face. No questions asked. I tell them, be honest. I always tell them, be honest. I don't take offense, but don't expect to be invited back. But that's and they don't want to come back. So in any case, there are nice people at the State Department also, but they're really, really anti-Israel people. So what happens is the State Department has a daily press conference. Okay, now it's supposed to be in line with the president. That's the idea. Okay, State Department's always supposed to get its talking points essentially from the president, not do its own thing. The secretary is supposed to be on line with the president because he works for the president. Good? Okay. The president's press secretary will rarely ever speak about Israel. It's very, very rare, and rarely will a question be asked. And even more rare is a question being asked of the president themselves about Israel. That's very, very rare. Hardly ever happens. Okay. So most of the times the American government is speaking about Israel, it's coming from the State Department. Okay. Now the State Department, depending on which president, but it's usually let's set aside Jimmy Carter on the one side and President Trump on the other. Okay. Every other president basically acted the exact same way. When Israel wanted to build in the settlements, okay, so the State Department would get up and say, we think that this is a horrible idea. We're against it. We criticize Israel. We condemn the announcement of new settlement homes. And then Israel says, thank you very much, and continues building. Okay, that's usually how President Obama was a little different. Jimmy Carter announced that the settlements were illegal. Okay, nobody really agreed with him at all. And then President Trump was incredibly different on the other side, because he said that there's nothing inconsistent with international law. So in any case, that's the idea. Okay, so the Biden administration has essentially had this approach of, listen, we don't want any fights. Okay, no fights, no controversy. We don't want anything that anybody has boo about. We're not going to be President Trump, where every single day we're coming out with another pro-Israel announcement. But we're also not going to be Jimmy Carter or President Obama. What we're going to essentially do is stick to one line. This is our one line. Both sides, meaning the Israelis and the Palestinians, should not do anything unilaterally. And that means not do anything by themselves without the acquiescence of the other party, which is not going to happen because the Israelis and Palestinians aren't talking to each other, that would in any way, shape, or form stop a two-state solution from happening. Okay. So for Israel, that means building new settlements or in the settlements. That could stop a two-state solution from happening. Obviously, the Palestinians are against that. And if Israel sat down with the Palestinians and said, hey, we want to build 3,000 new homes, what do you guys say? Give us a thumbs up. And they'd be like, no, right? So that's not going to happen. That's going to be unilateral by nature, okay? And so that's Israel's side, what Israel would do unilaterally, that would stop the two-state solution. And Palestinians blowing Jews up would also be a unilateral action that would forestall a two-state solution. So no terrorism. Okay, now the Palestinians have practiced terrorism, and we've continued building. Okay, so now the Biden administration has a choice to make. Does it get up every 2 minutes and says, "Hey, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong," and calls balls and strikes the entire presidency, or do they just simply get up and always say, "We've been consistent in our messaging. We do not approve of anything, any moves, any policies that." Forestalls the ability of a two-state solution to happen through unilateral action. So far for the 8-9 months, that's what they've been doing. Does not make a difference what's been going on here. The criticism has always been, don't do anything unilaterally that could forestall a two-state solution. And it didn't really make a difference, right? Nothing really mattered. Now, behind closed doors, right, supposedly, from what we hear in the media, and I'm not in the room, so I don't know, but supposedly President Biden really pushed Prime Minister Bennett in their meetings at the White House not to build anymore, and Prime Minister Bennett said no. He said, "I believe in building. You're not going to tell me not to build, but what I will do is in Area C, which is what Israel controls. Every time we announce that Israelis will build, we will also allow for the very first time thousands of Palestinians to build." So we'll announce permits for both populations. So on the one hand, that'll make my people happy, Naftali Bennett says, my right-wing base, because they'll get building. On the other hand, it'll make them upset and also make Palestinians happy because they'll have building. So while it's a unilateral action, right, by not doing along with the Palestinians that forestalls a two-state solution because there's more Jewish building, at the same time, it also increases Palestinian building. Right, which is something that the Palestinians have complained about for the last 25 years, that Israel doesn't approve buildings. So that's essentially like the comfortable place where they've gotten. Okay, Israel's about to probably this week announce 3,000 new Jewish homes and in the settlements, and they'll announce that they're going to grant permits to 1,200 Palestinians to build homes. Okay, so that's where they're going, and the State Department has come out officially and said we'd be very disappointed if there's 3,000 new permits being. They don't say anything about the 1,200 Palestinian homes, but they do criticize the 3,000. So it becomes sort of like this, grading over and over thing. But Naftali Bennett is very clear. There's a couple of things that he stands for, unequivocally, and one of them is building. The second thing he stands for is no two-state solution, which has got to, upset the Biden administration. So why doesn't the Biden administration come out full force against Naftali Bennett? Because what happens if Naftali Bennett is weakened in Israel? What happens if the Biden administration weakens Naftali Bennett? Then what? Who's going to answer this? What happens next?
Elections.
Elections happen, and guess who takes over if there's a weak Naftali Bennett?
Bibi, yeah.
Bibi, okay? Bibi takes over, right? And if Bibi takes over, then President Biden has the greatest headache in the world, because President Obama was much stronger of a personality than President Biden. And Bibi ran around Congress tying up President Biden's hands and making President Obama's hands and making life an absolute hell for him. So that's the last thing that they want. So what Prime Minister Bennett is saying, and this will get us to a next thing in a minute about the last thing about budget, is that don't criticize me too much, because if you knock me out, you're not going to get your, first of all, the ultimate prize for the Biden administration is Yair Lapid as prime minister. They cannot wait for that. That is something that they're salivating. Democrats have told me they cannot wait for Yair Lapid to be prime minister. This is something that they've been waiting for 15 years for Yair Lapid to be prime minister, and it looks like it's on track. So they have to swallow Bennett for right-wing Bennett for a couple of years, and then they'll be able to take Lapid and have Lapid, which they assume will just roll over all the settlements, take everybody out of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, We'll create a Palestinian state and yada yada. He's not going to do that, but that's what they imagine. Okay, so that's one reason. The next thing that happened was on Friday, the Defense Ministry, which is run by someone named Benny Gantz. Okay, so if you remember Benny Gantz was supposed to be the prime minister, ended up looking like an idiot because he trusted Bibi Netanyahu, which, I mean, every Israeli except for Benny Gantz knows he can't do. So he ended up trusting him, and no one knows what he was thinking on this one, thinking that he would be. But Benny Gantz is at the Defense Ministry, acts all on his own. He does not confine with the prime minister. He's in his own universe. Out in Tel Aviv, while everybody else is hanging out in Jerusalem. That's where the Defense Ministry is, the Kiryat, and he does his own thing. He met with Mahmoud Abbas without telling Prime Minister Bennett until it's too late. He's on his own. So one thing they announced was that 6 groups, Palestinian groups, which claim to be human rights groups, okay, that these 6 groups were actually supporting terrorists. And Israel claims they handed the evidence to the United States government. And then the United States government came out and said, whoa, you just named 6 human rights groups, terrorist groups. Those are human rights groups. We're very upset. And Israel blindsided us by not telling anybody. So that was like really bad, because this is a friction point between the two of them now, between the Biden administration and the Bennett administration. Okay, that's so I don't know where this is going to end up. But those groups now are terrorist organizations, meaning they obviously cannot operate freely under Israeli rule because they're supporting terrorists. Israel claims that they have evidence that they support these terrorist groups financially. They claim they have the evidence. They're not releasing it publicly, but they say that the United States has it. America saying that they have no evidence for it, and human rights groups should be sacrosanct. Israel saying we agree, human rights groups should be sacrosanct as long as they practice human rights, not terrorism. Okay. Any questions on that segment? Yes, Jordan.
So you said that Bennett is allowing like the construction of Palestinian homes. Which area of the West Bank is that?
That would be called Area C. Okay.
So it's all in Area C? Like all the construction that's happening?
Area A, Israel doesn't have to give permission. That's under Arab control. And Area B, according to the Oslo Accords, both Palestinians and Israelis are not allowed to build in it. So the only place that Arabs would need a permit to build from Israel is Area C. Most Palestinians do not live in Area C. Most Palestinians live in Areas A and very few in B. B is usually no man's land. But it's only like 60,000 Arabs that live in Area C, right? So 1,200 seems like very little, except for the fact of the 50,000 Palestinians, how many of them are actually looking to build, right? Like, so, you'd say like, oh, it should be 10,000 permits. Okay, but like 1/6 of the Palestinian population is not building onto their homes. That's not happening. Rebecca.
Which like agreement or war was it that like the settlements weren't included in that makes it a controversy? I'm saying, can you explain like more like why it's controversial to build in the settlements?
Okay. So the everybody believes. Well, let me switch my slide here. I'm getting very good at this stuff, and I'm very excited when I know what I'm doing here to make it good. Hold on 1 second. 1 second here. Okay. Watch this. Okay. So the red area is Judea and Samaria. Okay. I'm standing right here now. Okay. So that's the red area. That's called Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. Okay, got it? Watch my figure here. Okay, we're gonna go box to box. See if you can find a mistake. There's one mistake. Israel's controlled the red area since 1967, the Six-Day War. But Israel never made the red area part of Israel. Okay, it's not part of the state of Israel. I'm actually not standing in the state of Israel. Okay, where am I standing then? What country, you ask? Okay, I don't know. It's not called a country. Okay, so Hodaya also is not. Hodaya is right over here. Okay, and Rafi's in Israel over here. Okay, so
some people say that's debatable as well, but
yeah, some people debate this shouldn't be in Israel, but in any case, okay, so Israel never made.
I'm talking about like Renana not really being in Israel, but yeah.
Oh yeah, a lot of people think Renana is actually in America because everybody speaks English there. So right, it's like really just yeah. So in any case, but by the way, just so you know, Naftali Bennett lives about 2 blocks away from Rafi. I don't know in his new house, but he lives very close to Rafi in the
That's a hassle.
right. It's a hassle because he has a little security, and protesters. But also Naftali Bennett is also like somewhat American, which is why he moved to Renata. But in any case, going forward here, okay, Naftali Bennett, when he was the head of the settlement organization, still lived in Renata and had settlements. Okay, so in any case, going back to this, so this area was never made. The red area was never made part of Israel. The international community believes that this area should be Palestine. Okay, that's what it believes because of the 1948 partition plan. It was supposed to be Palestine, but the Arabs never accepted it. And but in any case, the international community feels this should be Palestine, and any Israeli here is illegally occupying it or living in it illegally. So I'm committing an international war crime, according to many people, by living here. Okay, Arabs living in the red area are not Israeli citizens because they are Palestinians, right? Arabs living in the white area are Israeli citizens. Okay, there's 2 million of them, a little over 20% of the country. Okay, they have every single right that I have. There's no difference between me and an Arab that lives here. Okay, that's now. Jews living in the red area are Israeli citizens. That's me. I am an Israeli citizen. I live here, as does anybody else that's here. Okay, and Israel and the United States consider it legal for Israel to control and live in the red area. The rest of the world does not. Got it? Handy dandy slide explains everything of the Israeli-Palestinian controversy in 54 years in 3.5 minutes. Okay, so yeah, really proud of this slide. Okay, so now let's go back to the last slide, which has our agenda. Okay, so so that is right. So that's the story. So that's why they're so upset. Any other questions on this first point that we have about the U.S.'s relationship and the Biden administration getting very testy with Israel? Anything else? Yes, Jordan.
So why is Israel saying those NGOs are terrorist organizations? Like, what's do we even know what their evidence for that is?
No, they haven't made it public. It's very funny how there's sort of an expectation that Israel will present its evidence of terrorist supporting from NGOs to the world. Oh, New York Times, how could we leave you out of this? We're so sorry. You don't know. We can't even believe we didn't invite you to the original secret meetings about this stuff when we did our investigations. It's unbelievable. You read Twitter and you read reporters criticisms of Israel. It's Israel hasn't presented the evidence. Why would any country ever present its evidence to the media? It's the craziest thing. No, Israel claims it gave it to America. America says we never got it. So they have to work that out between themselves. But presenting it to the international community, no, I'm sorry. There's how do you think Israel got this information, right? Israel got this information from informers, right? So if Israel makes this stuff public, it's Mahmoud Aziz, who works for one of these organizations, showed us how their banking works. So now we're going to show you, and Mahmoud Aziz would be the only guy that would know. So everybody in his terrorist organization, people usually wanting to deal with controversies through the the HR department, right? And judging things in a fair and equitable way, not a bullet through the head, will clearly deal with Muhammad in a merciful way for telling Israel all of the terrorist organization secrets. So we'll just invite the New York Times in, and well, you know what? We might as well publish his home address, pictures of him and his children, so that the terrorists can know exactly who to aim for. That's why Israel doesn't present evidence. It's ridiculous that they're expected to. Rafi.
What are the signs to look for to see whether the Biden administration and the State Department are going to actually put up a fight here, or they're just going to go with the party line?
If you start to see more and more statements by them that seem a little harsher, that's what I would be looking for. If it's more than just, there's a guy, Ned Price, is the State Department spokesperson. So if it's just Ned Price talking, and every day he gets up, this is the world's most boring man. His job is to be boring. That's literally his job. They send him out there and they say, please see if you can put the reporters to sleep. Okay, that's his job. He has a big loose leaf in front of him, and they ask him a question, and he flips the page until he finds it. It's literally what his job is. He's not supposed to be excited. The Trump administration had a very exciting lady who was the spokesperson. She was great, but the Biden administration, their whole persona is supposed to be, we're boring, we're just administrating, it's just doing our jobs. And everyone's like, well, that's not entertaining after 4 years of President Trump and his team. Okay. Going on, Prime Minister Bennett spent time with President Putin of Russia and then got stuck in Russia for Shabbos. It's amazing how Prime Minister Bennett, I mean, there are plenty, Rafi's dad travels a lot. No one gets stuck places for Shabbos as much as Prime Minister Bennett does. It's incredible. I don't know why he had to meet with Putin on a Friday afternoon. Why couldn't he met with him on a Thursday afternoon and then got back in time for Shabbos? It's amazing. I think this is the way of Prime Minister Bennett, like seeing the world for Shabbos. So he was stuck there for Shabbos, met with Putin on Friday night. Israel and Russia have two major things to discuss. They both center around Iran. One is stopping Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Two is Iranian influence in Syria. Okay, so Iran does not want. Let's go to a map here because I have it. And I like to show off. So hold on. Here we go. Okay, so here's Iran, right? And here is Syria. Okay, Russia's like up here. Okay, right around here. Okay, so Iran has sent. Sorry, I always get the hands mixed up. Iran has sent tons of forces from Iran. It's really over Iraq into Syria. Okay, so Iran's got tons of forces, and they keep moving dangerously close to Israel. When they get too close to Israel, Israel comes up and bombs them and kills them. Okay, so it's killed a lot of Iranians, Iranian generals, Iranian soldiers, and Israel's told Iran, don't get close. Russia is also in Syria, and Russia wants to make sure it has influence in Syria. So Israel will sometimes bomb Syria, right? This is, by the way, this is how close the capital of Damascus. Damascus and Israel they're a 6-minute flight with an F-16. Okay, so that's 6 minutes. So that means that an Israeli pilot can bomb Syria and be back in 20 minutes in the dining room eating dinner. Okay, that's how quick this is. Okay, it's literally just like, and then he goes home. Okay, so that's really how quick this stuff takes. There you go. But what's happening is that Russia doesn't want Israel to keep bombing because then it looks like Russia doesn't have control. So Israel tries to inform Russia beforehand, because then sometimes Russia says no, and Israel can't take no. So Israeli prime ministers and the Russian president always have to be in touch with each other in order to make sure that they're coordinating, and God forbid Israel ever kills Russian soldiers with an errant bombing. That would be really bad. So that's what they want to make sure that doesn't ever happen. Okay, so that's why Putin and Naftali Bennett meet, and that's why it's important that they're always in touch. So that's why usually the Israeli prime minister will not announce a meeting with Russia ahead of time, even though he really should. The reason why he doesn't announce it ahead of time is because usually most of their meetings have to come after something happened that shouldn't have happened. That the two nations are upset at each other because something happened, usually in Syria, and therefore it requires an emergency meeting. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, going on to the next piece here. Okay, so Israel has a coalition that's a very weak coalition, meaning that on the one hand it's strong because any of the parties inside the coalition would, if the coalition breaks up, would do worse in the next elections. They would not necessarily get into the government. So they are right now at their strongest than they're ever going to be. So that's point number one to keep in mind. Okay, they are at their strongest that they're ever going to be is right now. So they don't want to have the coalition break up and go to new elections. Israel has a law. Okay, here's the law that that if the government doesn't pass a budget, it by a certain point in time, I don't know what that point in time is. If it doesn't pass a budget, it automatically has to go to elections. The government falls and elections are called. That's what Bibi kept doing in order to make sure there would be new elections that are more favorable to him. He didn't allow a budget to be passed. So by not allowing a budget to be passed, he told his people, don't schedule a vote. No vote scheduled, government falls. Government falls, Bibi buys himself 60 days to the next election. That's how he kept doing it, okay? But one time it failed and other parties got together and were able to form a coalition. Now, the problem with this coalition is that they don't agree with each other on anything. The only thing they agree with on each other, but there's one thing they do agree about, which is that Bibi Netanyahu should not be prime minister. So they all got together based on that. So now they all know they can't do anything to rock the boat until the budget gets passed. The budget must be passed. I think the date is November 17th. If the budget is not passed by November 17th, then the government falls. Now, keep in mind, the coalition has a 1-vote majority out of 120 people. Okay, so if one person is upset about the budget or anything in the budget, so then that budget won't get passed. Okay, so what Prime Minister Bennett has asked everybody in the coalition is like, listen, let's not talk to each other or about each other about anything except for the budget until it passes. So we don't want to get anybody upset, because let's say somebody gets up and says we should give back all of the West Bank, and then all of a sudden everybody sits there and says, "Whoa, hold on a second, wait, I don't want to be part of that coalition." Then it falls apart, and they don't vote for the budget, and they hold it up because of the budget. Okay, so he's asked everybody, hold now. That's great, because then the government will hold until the budget's passed. But what happens the day after the budget's passed? That's the big question mark. No one knows what's going to happen at that point. Okay, then everything could go haywire. So right now, right now, former Prime Minister Netanyahu, head of the opposition, is trying everything to stir the pot and make sure. So the Likud has come up with this is really genius. It's devious, but it's genius. Okay, there are a number of positions that everybody in the coalition took when they ran for office. Okay, so for instance, some people were very big on climate. Let's give an example. Okay, climate, that there has to be like a lot of regulations placed on the Israeli people for climate things. Okay, but then when they got to the coalition, they couldn't get their thing passed because people in the coalition were against it. So they said, listen, you're not going to get everything you want, so you have to table that. But that's what they ran on. So people voted on them for that. So what the Likud does is the Likud writes a bill on something they don't believe in, let's say climate, for instance, and then put it up for a vote. And now this guy in the coalition, that's his issue. That was his issue, right? And now the opposition is putting up for a vote. So he can't vote for it because it's an opposition bill. So he can't vote for it. And then Likud gets up and says, look, he's such a hypocrite. He ran on this thing and now he's not voting for it. How could you vote for this guy? He said that he's going to protect you. So they did this with minimum wage. That minimum wage has to go up. So the Likud put forth a bill rising the minimum wage. So the Likud does not stand for it all. Okay, it's almost like the Republican Party putting up a bill like this. Okay, and Likud puts this bill forward. The bill fails, and then they all get up and point to a guy. They literally do this in the Knesset. They pointed to a guy in the Knesset and started booing him because he voted against his own issue. And then they turn to the workers of Israel and say, you voted for this guy because he promised you he would get you that raise. And he just voted against it. He did not get it for you. He voted against it. So come election time, when these guys run on their same issues again, there's going to be a guy standing there in the crowd saying, wait, how could you say you're for this? You voted against it. You're on the record against it. How when push comes to shove, after we put you in office to get this done, that's what they're doing to stir the pot. Eventually it'll work. Eventually somebody's going to crack. Somebody's going to sit there and say, I cannot vote against my own issue, right? I can't do this. I can't play this political game. This is why Jewish people should never go into politics, okay? Including Israeli Knesset members, because it makes you choose. This is really something I believe deeply. And although my wife is a politician, it makes you always choose your moral values and your positions against staying popular. That's against everything Judaism stands for. We're a moral people. We should have values, and we should stand for our values and nothing else. But what are you going to do? You have to play politics, or else you're not going to be in office. You're stuck with this catch-22. So that's what's happening. So what happens after November 17th? This budget will most probably get passed. In Israel, the way it works is that it goes through a committee. After the committee puts it out, it has to go through a couple of readings, that's called, which are really votes. And then once it goes through 3 readings, it becomes law. So the third law is coming up at the end of November. And then we'll see if they pass the budget. The budget, by the way, it will change Israeli life immensely. This is more domestic, so it's not really our issues. But if you want, check, start reading some of the details of the budget. It's going to change my family completely. We're already starting to figure out, like, financially how to do things differently. It's a huge difference, this budget. And most Israelis have no idea what's coming. They have no idea. They're going to hit the supermarkets the day after this budget's passed. And some of the supermarkets have, one of the big things is that there's like a quadruple tax on paper goods. Okay. Now, there's a lot of politics behind this. It's not just people are concerned about the environment. Victor Lieberman is the guy pushing this, and he doesn't know how to spell environment in Hebrew, English, or anything. Okay. And he's pushing this because it hurts the Haredi community. He hates Haredi. So he's pushing this. So my family, we use paper goods because we have a lot of guests, and there's no way we're doing 30 dishes every meal. So we use paper goods. So now we're looking at, like, either being taxed 4 times the amount for every meal that we have, or we're looking at getting somebody to help us with the dishes, or my kids, like, biggest nightmare, having to help out more. So that's, I'm kidding, my kids are tzaddikim. So that's the so that's it, really changes daily life. So after the elections, we'll have to see what's going to happen. Okay. Okay. That is all that I have to speak about. I've been speaking basically for almost 38 minutes straight. So, and I'm impressed because most people can't listen to somebody. I can't listen to somebody talk this long. I get bored listening to myself. But if you guys have questions, it's time for your questions now. Wow, there's a lot of questions you guys have. Okay, I see you put a lot of thought to this throughout the week, writing down your questions, preparing, coming to this meeting already with your questions. That's good. Okay, Rafi, go ahead.
It's not related, but can you explain to me the logic behind AIPAC's friendly incumbent rule or policy?
Yes. Okay. So what Rafi's talking about, Rafi is talking about a long time AIPAC policy, which is called the friendly incumbent rule. Okay. And what that means is that if you have a pro-Israel member of Congress or the Senate, and they are running for re-election, and they've been pro-Israel, they voted, they've been voted in support of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship their whole career. Even if you have somebody that's running against them, that would be more pro-Israel. Okay, I'll give you an example. This is from the old and ancient times when I was only 10 years old. Okay, so in Connecticut, you had a Senate race between the incumbent senator, whose name was Lowell Weicker. This is the example everybody gives. Lowell Weicker was a Jewish senator, pro-Israel, right? Pro-Israel, voted for Israel all the time, no complaints, running against a guy named Joe Lieberman, who would have been incredibly pro-Israel, and he ended up being incredibly pro-Israel. Okay, and the pro-Israel community supported Lowell Weicker against Joe Lieberman. And Joe Lieberman's sitting there saying, "Are you guys out of your minds? I'm going to be the greatest thing you ever had in the Senate. How could you not support me?" And we said, no, friendly incumbent rule, because here's the idea. If you're pro-Israel, you're going to have our community support, right? You don't have to worry about somebody, right? So as long as you're pro-Israel, our community is going to support you. You do not have to worry if you're not pro-Israel enough, if people don't like. That's it. We support the people that support what we believe in. That's the American way. So we're not going to always be trading against somebody. Okay, we're not going to be looking at how to get rid of somebody and that and how to put somebody in the next best thing. We promise you, you support what we believe in, we will support you. Right? That's the way every issue should work. Not who's going to be, because then what you're going to end up having is people just trying to out Israel each other, and then it becomes a partisan issue. And we don't want that. We don't want fighting on Israel. America should be in favor of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, and that should be it. That's the friendly incumbent rule. Right? Yeah. So that's the idea. Okay. Any other questions? Okie dokie. Okay, well, we are going to try. I had a meeting with AIPAC this week. I'll let you know, even though it's probably somewhat okay. Let's definitely stop the recording now. Hold on.